This happened in the 70s in Australia. I was about 14. Mum and Dad and the other kids had gone somewhere and I was alone in the house, out in the suburbs surrounded by bushland, at night. I was reading books in my bedroom when I noticed a bit of noise. I could only just barely hear it, but there was definitely a noise. Sounded like it was coming from inside the house. But the TV was off and we didn't have a radio. Suddenly everything was scary. A moment ago I was having a good time, now everything felt wrong. I put my book down and crept as silently as I could out into the hallway. Lucky my door was open because the bloody thing creaked. Once out in the hallway the noise became clearer. I still couldn't quite figure out what it was, but it was definitely not my imagination. Sounded like it was coming from the kitchen, and the only way there was through the living room. So I took a breath and crept round the corner of the hallway and into the living room. I'm on the balls of my feet and trying to avoid making any noise. Now I'm here, I can see the living room is empty, but the noise is louder still. It's definitely coming from the kitchen, and even worse, I can now tell what the noise is. It's two voices, and they are having a whispered argument. Now I am seriously scared. The only explanation I can think of is robbers. I spend about 5 minutes just standing stock still in the living room before deciding to try and peek around the corner into the kitchen. So as quietly as I can I creep towards the corner. I'm moving very slowly. I've even got my mouth open in case my breath gives me away. I reach the corner and just stick one eye around, and the kitchen is empty. But I can still hear the voices. And they're louder than ever. I can almost make out what they are arguing about now. Again I stand there. This time I am telling myself I don't believe in ghosts. And I did. And yet how the fuck can two invisible men be having an argument in the kitchen? In the end I start to move again, because I know if I don't do this I won't be sleeping tonight. I creep into the kitchen, and realize the voices are coming from the stove. Now this was in the 70s before stoves had those solid tops you have nowadays, instead they had a steel coil. I bend down and put my ear close and discover the voices are coming from where the metal coil joins some electrical plug before going back inside the stove. The voices are indeed two people arguing, they're on some kind of radio talk show. When my parents came home I showed the other kids how if you put your ear down real close to the stove top you could hear radio. I'm 55 now and this is still the most frightened I've been in my life. I needed to drop off my car to get fixed, and so I left home at 4 a.m. to drop it off and throw the keys in their drop box. My husband left for work at 5 and I needed to be home for the kids, so I figured I'd get my workout in running home. It was only 5 miles or so. On a whim I took our dog with me, a little 30 lb retriever mix who had literally never barked the 8 months we'd had him and was made of fluff and cuddles. I was running down a dark old town street in our city when my dog suddenly whirled around on a large lilac bush next to us and started barking like he was possessed. He sounded like a hellhound, at least 5 times bigger than he actually was. I backed away from the bush while my dog strained at the leash to murder someone. A dude popped out of the bush and I yelled I'd let the dog off the leash if he didn't get the fuck away from me. It was so dark he really couldn't see my little black fluff ball clearly and my doggo sounded like Cujo, so he started to jog down the road, looking back every once in a while, yelling he was a runner like me and I was being a bitch. He jogged under a streetlight about 100 m away. And he was wearing jeans and unlaced work boots and a ski-type hat. In July, in the South. I dashed up to a lit house, knocked, and called the cops from their porch as the homeowner stood with me and my dog. They told me there had been 2 muggings and an attempted rape within a 3-block radius in the past 2 weeks. My husband came to pick me up and our puppers got the steak for dinner. Even now, 10 years later, I can count on one hand the number of times he's barked and each time I've trusted his instincts. He once had the same reaction to a workman who came to the house and I wouldn't let the guy in. I told him our dog was insane and might hurt him, so we would have to put off the work for a bit just to make him leave. Our dog will practically grovel for affection from service people or delivery guys, so if he goes exorcist, I'm going to trust his judgment that the guy did not need access to my house and kids. The sun had gone down, and dark shadows filled our cozy suburban house. I often stayed home alone, and my parents trusted me to handle evenings by myself. But one night was different, and it still scares me today. It started normally. My mom kissed me goodnight and reminded me to lock the doors. The house was quiet, which usually made me feel safe. I did my homework with music playing softly in the background. Around 9 p.m., I went to the kitchen for a snack while chatting with a friend on the phone. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move in the hallway. My heart raced when I saw a blurry figure that seemed to disappear quickly. I tried to ignore it and went back to talking with my friend, but the house felt strange and unsettling. Later, while looking for a snack in the pantry, I heard a faint, eerie sound, soft scratching noises from above, in the attic. It was barely audible, but it made me freeze with fear. I realized I wasn't alone anymore. Every little noise made me jump, and I ended the call with my friend, my voice trembling as I tried to explain how scared I was. The scratching got louder and more urgent, echoing like a scary heartbeat through the house. With all my courage, I grabbed a flashlight and went upstairs to see what was making the noise. The attic door at the end of the hall seemed to call to me, its latch shaking. I pushed it open and shined the light inside, expecting to find nothing. Instead, I saw shadows swirling in the darkness and felt a cold wind that carried strange whispers. And then, in the dim light, I saw a figure, pale and ghostly, staring at me with dark eyes that chilled me to the bone. I stumbled back in terror, my heart pounding. Without thinking, I slammed the attic door shut and ran downstairs to the living room, where I sat shaking for hours, wrapped in a blanket. The scratching had stopped, but the silence felt heavy and suffocating. When my parents finally came home, they found me pale and frightened. I tried to explain what had happened, but I wasn't sure if they believed me. How could I make them understand the horror I had seen? Since that night, I've been afraid to be alone in the house after dark. The memory of that terrifying night stays with me, a reminder of the unseen dangers that can hide in our everyday lives. Kathleen had always been a fearless young woman. She lived alone, in a small house nestled deep within the woods. Her parents went on a trip, leaving Kathleen home alone during the biggest stormy night that she ever seen. You could hear the wind blow outside and the rain lashed against the windows, make this night more terrifying. As Kathleen settled in for the night, she heard a faint scratching sound coming from upstairs. She dismissed it as the wind or perhaps an animal outside. But the noise grew louder, and it was clear that it was coming from within the house. Curiosity mingled with a hint of fear, Kath cautiously made her way up the creaky staircase. The scratching sound led her to a closed door at the end of the hallway. She hesitated for a moment before slowly opening the door. She discovered a dimly lit room covered in dust and cobwebs. In the center of the room stood an old, antique mirror. Its glass was cracked, and the wooden frame was weathered and worn. Sarah approached the mirror, feeling an inexplicable pull. As she stared into the mirror, her reflection began to distort. The image of an eerie figure slowly emerged, with hollow eyes and a sinister smile. Frozen with fear, Sarah tried to turn away, but her body refused to move. The figure in the mirror reached out, its long, bony fingers stretching through the glass, closer and closer to her. With a blink, the power went out, the house was now in total darkness. Kath's heart raced as she fumbled for her phone, desperately trying to find a source of light. The scratching sound echoed through the house, growing louder and more insistent. She could feel a chilling presence behind her, but every time she turned around, there was nothing. In a moment of desperation, Kathleen closed her eyes and mustered all her courage. She dashed towards the hallway, blindly navigating through the darkness. The scratching sound pursued her, growing louder with each step. Finally, she reached the front door and burst out into the stormy night. As Kath stood outside, gasping for breath, she looked back at the house. The windows glowed a sinister red, and she could see shadows moving within. She realized that the entity from the mirror had escaped and was now free to roam her home. From that day on, Kathleen never returned to the house. The memory of that terrifying night haunted her, a constant reminder that some things are better left undisturbed. And the house, forever tainted by the malevolent spirit, stood abandoned, its secrets hidden within its walls. It was a stormy night in the small town of Brooksville. The wind howled and the rain battered against the windows of the old, creaky house on Maple. Sarah, a 17-year-old high school student, was home alone for the weekend. Her parents had left for a business trip, leaving her in charge of the house. She didn't mind, she enjoyed the solitude and the opportunity to catch up on her favorite horror movies. Sarah had just finished watching the latest thriller and was about to head to bed when she heard a noise coming from the basement. It was a faint, almost imperceptible sound, like a soft whisper or a distant echo. She paused the movie, straining to hear through the downpour outside. The noise continued, a rhythmic tapping that sent chills down her spine. Probably just the old pipes, she muttered to herself, trying to dismiss the uneasy feeling creeping up her neck. She grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and headed towards the basement door. The wooden stairs creaked under her weight as she descended into the dark, damp basement. She scanned the room with her flashlight, revealing boxes of old family belongings and unused furniture covered in dusty sheets. Nothing seemed out of place. As she turned to go back upstairs, she noticed something odd. In the far corner of the basement, behind a stack of old boxes, there was a door she had never seen before. It was small, almost hidden, and looked like it hadn't been opened in years. Curiosity got the better of her, and she approached the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She reached for the doorknob, but it was cold to the touch, sending a shiver through her body. With a deep breath, she turned the knob and slowly pushed the door open. The hinges groaned in protest, and a musty smell wafted out from the darkness beyond. She shone her flashlight into the room, revealing a small, dimly lit space filled with cobwebs and dust. In the center of the room stood an old, ornate mirror. Its surface was tarnished and cracked, reflecting the dim light in eerie patterns. As she approached the mirror, she felt a strange sensation, like she was being watched. She turned around quickly, but there was nothing there. Just the silence of the basement and the distant sound of the storm outside. She turned back to the mirror and, out of the corner of her eye, she saw a shadow move. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized the shadow wasn't her own. It was tall, thin, and seemed to be coming closer. She stepped back, her flashlight flickering, and the shadow disappeared. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. She spun around, but there was no one there. The footsteps grew louder, coming closer, echoing through the basement. She backed up against the wall, her flashlight shaking in her trembling hand. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then, a cold, bony hand grabbed her shoulder. She screamed and turned, but there was no one there. Just the darkness and the mirror. She ran up the stairs, her heart pounding, and slammed the basement door behind her. She locked it and leaned against it, trying to catch her breath. Her phone rang, breaking the silence. She jumped, almost dropping her flashlight. She picked up the phone and saw it was her mom calling. She answered, her voice shaking. "Mom, there's something in the basement," she said, her eyes darting around the dark hallway. "Sarah, calm down," her mom replied. "What are you talking about?" "There's a door in the basement, and I heard footsteps, and..." "Sarah, listen to me," her mom interrupted. We don't have a basement. Sarah's blood ran cold. She looked back at the door she had just locked, realizing it wasn't the basement door. It was the front door. The realization hit her like a truck. The thing in the house wasn't in the basement. It was already upstairs with her. She heard a whisper behind her. She turned around slowly, her flashlight revealing a tall, shadowy figure standing at the top of the stairs, its eyes glowing in the darkness. And then, the lights went